This is Pastor Morris D. Lewis in the continuation of the studies of the Joseph story. And our study at this sitting is the coat of many colors. Now let's turn to our text in the book of Genesis, the 37th chapter, and read verse 2 and 3 and following. Genesis 37, verse 2. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah. And then verse 3, Now Israel, that is Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Now it says that Joseph was the son of his old age. Now it's quite likely that this may be slightly misleading to think that all the other children of Rachel and Leah were born before Rachel had her children. The story is that they intermingled one with the other. And all the children of Jacob were born in the land of Babylon except Benjamin, the youngest of them all, and the full brother of Joseph, their mother being Rachel. So it says the fact that he was the son of his old age perhaps means more in the fact that in his old age, this son stood out more than all the others to absorb the great principles that to Jacob were very, very important to him, particularly as he comes to the end of his life. So when he says he was the son of his old age, it probably conveys the idea that Joseph was the one that was most comforting to him in his old age, though Joseph was the one who most understood the great principles that he was endeavoring to lay before his children. And Joseph seemed to get a hold of the great basic concept of the birthright and its significance and what it would mean to the family of Jacob as it would finally be bestowed upon his children. So obviously the relationship of Joseph to his father in the spiritual aspects of the revelations of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob was to him a great comfort, for he saw in this boy the principles that would be picked up and carried on in the sense of the birthright. Now the moment that he made him a coat of many colors, very, very obviously gave the whole thing away. For it says that when this took place, that the tribe of Reuben rose up, and the brothers of Reuben began to see that their father was making a very distinctive gesture concerning the birthright by giving Joseph this coat of many colors. Now, in the biblical story of the coat of many colors, it indicates that these colors have a very distinctive meaning. Now, obviously, the coat of many colors, it very, very likely must have been quite similar to that of the ephod of the priest later on, that had the colors of blue, purple, and scarlet in it. Now, in the book of 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter, we have a statement here concerning a coat similar to this. It is 2 Samuel, the 13th chapter, and the 18th verse. Now, this is the story of the sons of David, and particularly as pertained to one of his daughters by the name of Tamar, who was a full sister to Absalom. And verse 18, and it says, And she had a garment of divers colors upon her, for with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgin apparelled. Now, it's obvious from this text that the king's son and daughters, and here particularly the daughter, was robed in a garment of many colors that indicated their royalty. Now, one of these colors on the robe very obviously was that of purple, for the Bible says in the book of Judges, the 9th chapter, let's see just a moment, the book of Judges, the 8th chapter, verse 26, This is speaking of the capture of one of the cities by Joab, and it says that the gold in the earring, this is verse 26, the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels, and it says, and the collars and the purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian. Now, it's very, very obvious that the coat of many colors that Joseph received from his father, and the coat of many colors that Tamar received from her father, and the ephod of the Levites, which had blue, red, and purple in it, and that purple was a symbol of their kingship. So it's quite obvious that the purple was on this robe, and the moment that it appeared on this robe, it is obvious that they recognized that Joseph was going to receive a very distinctive aspect of the birthright. Now you can see right away that that would very likely throw the brothers into an envious position as to who would, after Reuben was rejected, as to who would come up with the principles of the birthright. And so that's why when Joseph received the coat of many colors, and he was a child of Jacob's old age, that they began to read the message loud and clear that Jacob was looking to Joseph as a position for the position of the birthright. Now, in 1 Chronicles, the 5th chapter, verse 1, now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but forasmuch as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel. And the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. So the genealogy did not fall to Joseph. As I've already said, the genealogy fell to Judah later on. But here it says, because Reuben had failed in his moral life, and obvious Jacob knew that, Joseph now received one of the aspects of the birthright of the firstborn. And now the fact that he would receive this garment was obvious indication, and the spirit of prophecy says that when these brothers saw Joseph wearing this coat of many colors, which was a distinctive coat for those who would come into positions of rulership, and you remember one of the positions of the birthright was to become king, one to be a priest, and one to be in the genealogical line of the Savior, and one that he would receive a double proportion. Well, you know already by Joseph's name that he was going to receive the double proportion, but the fact that he had on that coat of many colors set him out in such a manner that the other brothers who were looking, now that Reuben had been rejected, the next in line was Levi, and after him Simeon, and after him Judah. Now these are the ones who come to play in a very, very specific way in the Joseph story. So keep this in mind, that after Reuben was rejected, the next in line would be Levi. And I suppose because of his next of age and next in position, he probably thought he would be in line to receive it. But Simeon followed him, and then Judah. And these persons have a very distinctive position in the Joseph story. So watch it as the story develops. Now, I want to take up the word for birthright in the book of in the Old Testament. In the book of Leviticus, the 27th chapter, verse 33, this particular verse is pertaining to the priest in the Hebrew economy and political situation of their families. Whenever a person had the possibility of leprosy, they were to come to the priest, and he was trained, I suppose, in some aspects of medical diagnosis, and he would look at the person and search them very closely. And if he saw the factors that were indicative of leprosy, and he had to make that pronunciation to the person, as you know, this would ostracize them from society, and it was a horrible experience. So the priest must be very careful and be certain if he makes this pronunciation, because it would change the life of the person who would receive this particular statement as to their physical well-being. Now, the word, it says, and the priest would search the person to see whether or not he had the symptoms and the outward characteristics of leprosy. Now, the word search as you could see in this text, it would have very significant meaning, indicating the person's intellectual aspect of looking it over very carefully. Now, that word for search is bakar in Hebrew, and many times it is rendered bakor, which is the word for birthright. Now, in 2 Kings, the 2nd chapter, 2 Kings, the 16th chapter, and verse 15, it says that the altar, that is the brazen altar in the court, was for the inquiry of the priest. That they used this altar to inquire into the Lord's will on certain matters, and it turned out that this was the case. Now, the word inquire here is also the word for birthright in Hebrew, bakor. That is, now I'm bringing this up to show that the birthright bestowed upon the individual has the connotation of searching and inquiring. Now, in the book of Ezra, the 4th chapter and verse 15, this particular text is when the king of Medo-Persia, who, having received letters from the people rebuilding Jerusalem, went before, they sent letters over there to warn the king that these Jews were rebuilding Jerusalem and that this might be a threat to the political situation of the Medo-Persians. So in this text, Ezra 4:15, it says, "And the king ordered a search for the records about Jerusalem as to whether or not what the letter he received from the enemies of Israel, as to whether or not it was factual." So he had somebody look in the archives and search diligently for the record and whether or not they had ever made a decree. And finally, it says in the Bible, and they found the decree of Cyrus, wherein he had told the Jews that they could rebuild, and made a decree to that effect. Now, you can imagine how much searching and inquiry and diligence that they went to look back through those files of years to find the piece of the instrument, the legal instrument that they wanted. Now, the reason I bring this up to show that this word bakor, which is the word for birthright, involves this particular type of personality. It's very, very obvious then that Joseph inquired of his father into the religious meaning of Abraham and the promises made to him and to Isaac, and he searched into these matters, and this is what attracted Jacob's attention to call him the son of his old age and to bestow upon him the birthright, because his life depicted the qualities of that birthright, and that's what I want you to see in this story. And you'll see that as it develops all along, this will be confirmed as we take up the Joseph story as it goes into Egypt. Now, I want to point out a particular text here in the 37th chapter of Genesis in our story, verse 4. "And when his brothers saw that their father had loved him more than all his brethren." Now, they detected this. And it's obvious because of the response of Joseph to his father's delineations of the great promises of God to Abraham and Isaac, and repeated them to him. And no doubt he related to him his wrestling with the angel and receiving the name Israel, which he is referred to here. And then it says, "And these brothers hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him." They hated him and they could not speak peaceably unto him. So in other words, their animosity and envy and jealousy was of such a nature, they just couldn't have a good word for Joseph. And that hatred begins to make itself apparent. And no doubt Joseph detected that and reported it back to his father. Now, I want you to see how every little aspect of this story has tremendous implications in prophecy of the Jewish nation that he finally chooses in the sons of Jacob, and finally as it moves clear on down to the time of Christ. I want to call your attention to verse 71 of the first chapter of Luke. Now, this is again a statement by Zacharias concerning his son and the fact that his son will be the forerunner of the Messiah. And these comments he makes in regards to that situation. Verse 70 and 71, let us read. "As he spake by the mouth of his holy prophets," that's Zechariah speaking by the mouth, God is speaking by the mouth of his holy prophets, "which have been since the world began." So Zechariah says that God has spoken by his prophets since the world began. Certainly this would include Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and finally it will come to Joseph. So God is speaking not only by Jacob and Joseph, he says, that God has spoken by these prophets since the world began. Now verse 71, that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all that hate us. So you see right away, Zacharias picks up the great history of his people, how that this animosity and hatred has been between the saints of God and their close relatives, and particularly the heathen round about them. So right away you see this hatred that Zacharias indicates and says will be the result of Christ being born into the world, and we know this to be a fact, that when the Jews found out his claims to be the Son of God and so forth, the hatred began from a very early time in Christ's ministry and finally ended in his crucifixion. Now you see how the Joseph story now is beginning to pick up this element, and you'll see how this plays a very distinctive part all through the Joseph story. So it says that when these brothers saw the beautiful robe that Jacob had provided for Joseph, and they read it loud and clear, they hated him, and they were jealous, and their envy began to develop. Now it says, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told the dream to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. Now we'll take up the dream and its prophetical significance. But I just want to say that the time came, it says, after he had related the dreams, which we shall take up shortly, that Joseph received word from his father Jacob that he was a little bit disturbed about his brothers being up in the area of Shechem. Now you remember that it was in that area that the sons, and particularly Levi and Simeon and Judah, but particularly Levi and Simeon, were the ones who were most vicious in destroying the people of Shechem. In fact, they killed all the occupants of the city. That may give you some idea of their particular attitudes. So it says that Jacob said to Joseph, I would like for you to go and find your brethren up in the area of Shechem. I am just a little bit concerned for those people up there may remember this murderous deed, and they may wreak vengeance upon them. And I'm a little disturbed. Would you go up and see the brethren and see how the flocks are getting along? Now this is verse 12 of the 37th chapter of Genesis. And his brethren went to feed their flocks in Shechem. And Israel said unto Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? As much as to say, that was the trouble spot a few years ago with our family and the people of Shechem. Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, here I am. Now you gather by that Joseph was very obedient to his father, and I suppose maybe he did not anticipate all the implications that would be involved in the Shechem experience. He said to him, go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he went, he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. Now, one of the things I suppose his father did that was probably not exhibiting the most discretion was that he permitted Joseph, or he dressed Joseph in this coat of many colors. And that was a mistake, because whenever those brothers saw that, particularly Levi and Simeon, and very likely Judah, that had a lot to say to them, which inspired their hatred. Now you remember Joseph went up to Shechem, and he looked around and he couldn't find him. And it says in verse 15, and a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, what do you seek? What seekest thou? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, they are departed hence, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. Now Dothan was distinctively a little north and a great deal west of Shechem. Now, it's quite obvious that this place has a meaning. Dotham, or Dothan in the Hebrew, means wells of water. Now, you see how this begins to introduce a problem in Joseph's life. Wells of water. So he went over to Dothan, and sure enough, he found them. And I suppose he saw them quite a ways off, where there were probably 10 brothers of them. Joseph and Benjamin may not have been with them. And it says, and when they saw him afar off, verse 18, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, behold this dreamer. He come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit, and we will say some evil beast. And we'll see whether this dreamer and this one who wears this coat of colors indicating his claim to the birthright will turn out as he thinks it may. So you see, they saw him away afar off, and obviously his very colorful coat in the sunshine, they knew right away before he ever got close who it was. So they plan, you see, evil against him, and their hatred now, of course, begins to make itself known. Now you can see why Zacharias said, when he was speaking about the prophetical aspect of his son John, announcing the work of Christ, it certainly was going to involve the hatred of the Jewish people, as we know it certainly did. Now, notice in the book of John, the 8th chapter, how the little details of the Joseph story, as we've already read in the Spirit of Prophecy, and the statement from Pharaoh in calling Joseph Zaphnath-Paaneah, that he pertained to the Son of God, how that it reveals Christ in this particular thing that we're talking about. In the 8th chapter of the Gospel of John and verse 40, these words Christ said to the Jews in discussing their fatherhood as Abraham and his fatherhood. This is the discussion, and he claims to be the Son of God, and this brought a certain contention to the Jews in the temple. And the record of verse 40 is, but now, this is Christ speaking, but now you seek to kill me, a man that hath told you the truth, which I have heard of God. This did not Abraham. Now you see, notice this speech. You seek to kill me. Now it's obvious, you see, from the Joseph story that the brethren had in mind of killing him because of the hatred. And what was the thing that brought this hatred on? Well, it was the interpretation of the dreams that he related to the family, and the fact that he wore this coat indicating that his father was bestowing upon him the meaning of the colors of the coat, one of them very likely purple, representing kingship, one of them red, representing priesthood, and one of them blue, which represents righteousness in the great plan of salvation. So this coat of many colors spoke very clearly to the brethren and stirred up their envy and hatred, and they plotted to kill him. Now Christ said, why do you plot to kill me? I only have told you the truth. Well, this is exactly what we find in the story of Joseph, what he told his father about the brethren, and what he said in regards to the visions, which we shall see, was none other than the truth, because God was with him and bestowing on him the birthright. Now remember always that the birthright implies that particular quality of searching and inquiring into the things of God and their particular meaning. So this coat has a very, very special meaning in the life of Joseph. Now let's take up a text to give some emphasis, further emphasis to this coat and its meaning. In the book of Psalms, the 25th chapter, verse 3, it says, Yea, let none that wait on thee be ashamed, let them be ashamed which transgress without cause. Now the word transgress here in the original language of the Hebrew is the word beged. Now beged is the word for garment in Hebrew. So the Hebrew background of symbols and their interpretation is very, very clear on the matter of clothing and garments. The person is clothed. The word for clothing or garment is beged, which is the word for sin. The word beged also means treachery. It appears about 20 or 25 times in the Old Testament, and about 23 of those instances it comes from the word beged, which means garment. So the idea of transgression and treachery is the word for garment. That is, the ordinary clothing of the people. Now you can see why it will be significant in the Joseph story. Excuse me. And all through the revelation of the Bible, as it comes out of the Joseph story, that the clothing is very, very important in the spiritual meaning of the birthright. That they shall be clothed either in treachery and transgression and beged, which is treachery, or they must have a robe. And of course, when Joseph came out with that robe, having the colors that indicated his priesthood, his birthright, and his rulership, it incensed his brother right away. So the fact that the brothers hated Joseph is very, very clear. And the reason for it is because he told them the truth of his garment and the implications of what God was going to do with him in the birthright, particularly as it pertains to Egypt. Now, I want to make another observation of the love and hatred, how it is exhibited in those who wear the garment of God of many colors, or that are clothed in the ordinary garment of transgression and treachery, which is beged. In the Ten Commandments, the 20th chapter of Exodus, verse 5 and 6, I want to point out in the law of God this basic concept of love and hatred between those who live the truth and those who don't, as was also picked up, as I spoke to you, of Zacharias concerning the life of Christ. In verse 5 it says, "Thou shalt not bow down thyself to serve them, for I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate." Now here it points out specifically in the Ten Commandments that those who hate, this hatred will be passed on from father to son and father to son. So you see now that there is a great line of hatred growing out of the Jacob children, and it will be manifested all through the history of Israel and clear into the world inhabitants of those who are living for Christ and those who take up the cudgel of hatred against him. Now, verse 6 of the Ten Commandments chapter says, "And showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments." Now, this mercy that he is showing to them, in just picking up a little point of Zacharias and Mary's story, John, the son of Zacharias, who was the forerunner of Christ, his name in Hebrew means mercy and gracious, coming from the word Hanan in Hebrew. So when it speaks of God showing mercy, he certainly showed it in John in announcing the coming of the Christ, and he certainly showed it in Joseph in announcing that God would come in the person of Joseph as Christ to Egypt, which represents the whole world, and provide a great plan of salvation. Now, as we see the Joseph story in large, we'll see how this makes a great story. Now, remember, in the book of Revelation, the 5th chapter, verse 10, the great promise to God's people is that they shall become kings and priests of God. These were the colors indicated in the Joseph story. Now, the word for kings, as I read in the Zechariah, that the coming of Christ was as the sun rising, and this is the great story of Joseph as rising in Joseph's life as a type of Christ, would rise as the sun in the land of darkness of Egypt and reveal the plan of salvation.